It started the first week I was working the night shift at the grain elevator. I didn't think much of it at the time. I assumed it was just one of those odd, quiet things that happens when you're alone on the plains after midnight. I work in a small town called Laverne in northwest Oklahoma. It's flat out here, endless fields of wheat and sorghum, a scattering of farmhouses, and the occasional grain elevator sitting off the highway like a dull landmark. I was hired as the night watchman, mostly to monitor the grain bins, make sure the equipment ran correctly, and log deliveries. Shifts start at 11 p.m. and end around 6 a.m., and for the first few weeks, it was exactly what I expected. Silent nights, the occasional truck rolling up, the faint hum of motors in the distance, and the steady creak of the elevator machinery. I got into a routine quickly. I checked the bins first thing, walked the perimeter of the facility, make sure the fences were intact, then spend a couple of hours in the office monitoring the CCTV screens. Most nights were uneventful. The weather was usually cold and dry in February, sometimes foggy. A single street light on the edge of the property would cast a pale circle onto the asphalt, long shadows stretching toward the fields. I'd keep a mug of coffee next to me, scribble notes, and half listen to the radio for local weather updates. It was during one of these nights that I noticed him. I didn't think much of it at first. I was on the northern perimeter, checking the bins, when I saw a figure on the horizon, just beyond the edge of the property. He was standing next to a dirt access road about a quarter-mile away, near a line of abandoned silos. I could only see the silhouette, but it looked like a man in a dark jacket, standing completely still. No movement at all. The first time, I assumed he was a farmer or a trucker. There were a few back roads leading to neighboring farms, and sometimes people walked at night, especially around full moon. I went back inside, glanced at the CCTV cameras. There was nothing. The cameras covered the perimeter, but the figure was too far off, between two silos, partially hidden by the dark. I shrugged and went back to my log. The next night he was there again. Same place, same posture. I remembered thinking that maybe I had just missed him the night before, but now I noticed the timing. He appeared just after I did my first perimeter check. I didn't see him move when I walked the path. I walked closer, maybe 50 feet, and when I got that close, he was gone. Nothing. No footprints, no car, nothing to suggest he had been there. By the third night, I started keeping a mental note of his appearances. He never approached the elevator. He never walked along the property line. He just stood, always in the same spot, for roughly the same amount of time. When I finished my first round of checks and looked back, he was gone. No sound, no lights, nothing. I mentioned it to the morning supervisor, a guy named Ray, over coffee one afternoon. He chuckled. "People walk out there sometimes," he said. "Probably some drunk kid from town. You'll get used to it." I wanted to believe him, but the figure never moved like someone drunk. He was always straight, shoulders squared, facing the grain bins directly. I couldn't see a face, but I felt like he was watching. For a while I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was some kind of trick of the light, my mind filling in shapes in the dark. I'd been alone for hours at a time, staring at shadowed fields and rusted metal bins. The human brain does weird things. I went through the motions, rounds, logs, coffee. I didn't try to confront him, didn't call the sheriff, didn't even mention it to anyone else. Then a pattern started to emerge. He wasn't just appearing at random. He was showing up only on certain nights, usually nights when the wind was calm or when the temperature dropped below freezing. And he always vanished right before I did the second perimeter check. I started marking the nights in my log, writing down the date, time, wind, temperature, and visibility. It became almost scientific. I had 30 nights worth of data by the time I started noticing something else. On nights when he appeared, something subtle changed around the elevator. The machinery didn't make the usual low hum. The lights above the loading bays flickered for a moment. The radio static shifted slightly, almost like someone had brushed against the wires. Nothing I could point to definitively, but enough that I noticed it after weeks of routine. On nights he didn't appear, everything ran normal. One night, I decided to stay outside for longer. I bundled up, parka, gloves, knit cap, and walked toward the figure, keeping a careful distance. I wanted to see if it was someone I could talk to. When I got closer, maybe 30 feet away, I realized that it wasn't just still, it was perfectly still, unnaturally so. No twitch, no sway in the wind. I stopped. My breath steamed in the cold. And then it disappeared. Not running, not walking, just gone. The wind picked up, brushing against my coat, and for a moment, I could hear the faint sound of grain shifting in the bins behind me. Nothing else. After that, I began noticing more details in the environment. On nights he appeared, I would sometimes catch glimpses of small, deliberate things out of place. A tarp flapped in a way it hadn't before. A ladder leaned slightly differently against a silo. A cone shifted by a few inches. Minor things. Nothing I could use to explain the figure. But when he wasn't there, everything stayed exactly the same from night to night. Weeks passed. I started timing my rounds differently, noting the small things that moved or changed. I never saw the figure up close. I never heard him speak, never saw a car, never detected a scent. It was as if he existed only to mark a particular type of night, a precise alignment of quiet and cold. One night in March, during a full moon, I did my usual check and the figure appeared again. I tried something different. I stayed put, crouched behind a small grain loader, just watching. He didn't move. I counted 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes. I tried blinking, looking away, looking back. Nothing. And then, I swear I saw another movement. Farther off, near the edge of the property, maybe a quarter mile past where he normally stood. Something smaller, or maybe just another person. I froze. For the next 5 minutes, the smaller figure disappeared completely. When I finally moved again, the original figure was gone as well. I don't know how long I had been outside, but it felt like an hour. After that night, I started keeping binoculars at the office. I'd scan the horizon quietly during my rounds. I never caught him moving, never caught him interacting with anything. But I started noticing the nights when he appeared seemed colder, quieter, almost like the world itself held its breath. Even the distant highways were quieter. Trucks passed slower, farm lights stayed off longer. I started calling it his nights in my head. Eventually, I tried recording the nights with a handheld camera. I would set it on a tripod, record the area he usually appeared, and leave it running. When I reviewed the footage in the morning, I never saw him. The horizon looked empty, the shadows normal. But in several clips, subtle things were out of place. The dirt road seemed scuffed, as if someone had walked across it. A fence panel seemed slightly misaligned. A stray grain sack would be leaning differently than the previous day. Tiny things. Almost too small to notice. It became routine to watch for him. Some nights he appeared, some nights he didn't. But the nights he did, the minor environmental shifts always followed. I tried to explain it logically, animals, wind, equipment settling, but the alignment with his presence was uncanny. I asked a couple of the day crew about odd nights. They laughed, assumed I had cabin fever. "You see ghosts out there?" one guy said. "Better keep your thermals on, man." I didn't push it. I knew they wouldn't understand, and besides, there was no one else I could reliably talk to. By April, the figure became less frequent. I began counting the nights he didn't show up. Some weeks he would appear once or twice. Some weeks not at all. But the pattern, the precise alignment with calm wind, low temperature, and the moment I did the first perimeter check, never changed. I documented everything in a notebook. Date, wind, temperature, time, whether the figure appeared. It became my own quiet obsession, though I never admitted it aloud. The last time I saw him, it was early May. The wheat fields were green now, the air slightly warmer, the nights shorter. I walked my first perimeter check as usual and glanced toward the horizon. He was there, the same silhouette, the same posture, facing the bins. I stopped. He didn't move. I watched for 15 minutes. Then he simply vanished. The wind picked up. A crow cawed from a distant fence post. The world returned to normal. I haven't seen him since. But the routine hasn't returned to exactly normal either. Even now, when I walk the perimeter alone, I glanced toward the horizon, half expecting to see him standing there again. Some nights, I swear I hear the faint hum of something not from the machinery, a subtle vibration in the air, or a shift in the shadows. Nothing concrete. Nothing anyone else could notice. I don't know who or what he was. I don't know why he appeared only on certain nights. And I don't know why he always vanished the moment I got close. But the experience left a quiet mark on me. I continue my shifts, keep my logs, do my rounds, and the grain bins continue to hum at night. And sometimes, when the air is still and the world feels a little too quiet, I catch a glimpse of a dark figure at the edge of my vision. It's enough to make me pause, check the time, check the wind, and remind myself that there are things out there that simply don't need explanation. I'll never forget those nights. I started working at the Cape Foulweather Lighthouse in late October. At first, it felt like any other maintenance job. I didn't expect anything unusual, but after a few nights, I realized I wasn't alone. I'm the night assistant at the lighthouse, near a small town called Depot Bay on the Oregon coast. My main duties are checking the light, monitoring the foghorn, logging weather readings, and performing minor maintenance on the structure and nearby outbuildings. The lighthouse sits on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, surrounded by jagged rocks and a thin stretch of coastal forest. The waves crash against the shore constantly, but at night the sound drops behind the wind, leaving a strange, low hum that feels almost internal. My shifts start at 10 p.m. and end at 6 a.m. I arrive after dark, usually wearing a heavy coat and rubber boots. I check the foghorn, clean the lens of the light, climb the spiral staircase, and ensure all systems are functional. For the first week, it was just me, the hum of the ocean, and the occasional passing lights of a distant fishing boat. Then I noticed him. The first time I was on the catwalk outside the lantern room, inspecting the light's rotation, when I saw a figure on the edge of the cliff below the lighthouse. It was hard to make out much. A man in dark clothing standing completely still, staring at the lighthouse. I froze for a moment, then blinked. He was gone. There were no footprints in the damp grass, no sound of movement, nothing to suggest anyone had been there. I assumed it was a hiker or a tourist who had wandered too far. The cliff edge isn't safe, and local authorities often warn people to stay on the marked paths. I went back inside, chalking it up to fatigue and shadows in the fog. But the next night he appeared again in the exact same spot, around the same time I reached the catwalk. Over the next few weeks, a subtle pattern emerged. He only appeared during calm nights with low fog. When the wind picked up or the ocean waves were louder than usual, he never showed. And he never moved from the cliff edge. He didn't wave, speak, or gesture. He just stood, staring at the lighthouse as I did my rounds. I started keeping notes. Date, time, wind speed, visibility, and whether he appeared. There was consistency I couldn't explain. If conditions were right, he would show up, always at the same location, always for the same amount of time, roughly 10 to 15 minutes. When my rounds were complete, he would disappear, always before I descended the stairs to the lower buildings. It became routine. I began timing my checks carefully, walking to the catwalk slowly, noting the temperature, wind, and ocean conditions. I never approached him directly. I never saw a face. Even with binoculars, he was just a dark shape, perfectly still, blending into the shadow of the cliff. One night, I decided to document it more carefully. I set up a small video camera on the outer railing of the catwalk, angled toward the cliff edge. I left it running while I completed my rounds. The footage, when I reviewed it in the morning, showed nothing. The cliff was empty. No figure. No footprints. No trace of anyone being there. But in the frames where he should have appeared, there were slight changes in the environment. Rocks shifted subtly, a piece of driftwood lying differently than it had the night before, small movements that didn't match the tide or wind. The phenomenon became more unsettling as the nights went on. On nights he appeared, the foghorn would occasionally skip a beat, a faint lag in the rotation of the light, or a small metallic vibration in the railing beneath my hands. Nothing major, nothing dangerous. but it always coincided with his presence. On nights he didn't appear, the lighthouse operated normally, exactly the same as it always had. I mentioned it casually to the day staff once. They laughed, assuming I was joking or imagining things in the isolation of night work. One woman suggested it might be a local artist, someone photographing the lighthouse. Another said it could be a lost fisherman. I didn't argue. I didn't have proof, only observations. After several weeks, I became hyper-aware of the cliff edge during my rounds. Even when he didn't appear, I'd check the area automatically, almost without thinking. I started noticing details I hadn't before. Small depressions in the grass, patches of moss flattened as if someone had knelt, the faint smell of salt and seaweed mixed with something faintly metallic. Minor things. Almost too subtle to notice. By mid-November, I realized the figure sometimes appeared in multiple locations around the lighthouse. He was never near the buildings themselves, never on the catwalk, never in the light's beam. Always the cliff, the coastal forest edge, or the rocks below. I would catch glimpses from the staircase window, a dark shape between the trees, perfectly still, always oriented toward the lighthouse. I tried to rationalize it. Wildlife, shadows, hallucinations from fatigue. I would check the same spots in daylight. Nothing. No footprints, no human signs, no indication that anyone had been there. The lighthouse grounds were public property, accessible by a walking path, but the areas where I saw him were steep cliffs and rocks inaccessible without ropes. One night, during a near-complete fog, I saw two figures. I almost didn't believe it. One in the usual spot on the cliff edge, another smaller figure closer to the forest line. Both were still, both facing the lighthouse. I stayed inside the lantern room, observing through the glass. I don't know how long I watched. Minutes, maybe 20. Then they disappeared simultaneously. The fog shifted, the lighthouse machinery hummed normally, the night returned to its usual quiet. Both facing the lighthouse. I stayed inside the lantern room, observing through the glass. I don't know how long I watched. Minutes, maybe 20. Then they disappeared simultaneously. The fog shifted, the lighthouse machinery hummed normally, the night returned to its usual quiet. I stopped trying to approach him. I stopped setting up cameras. There was nothing to gain, nothing to learn. I simply observed, noting each night whether he appeared or not. And the minor environmental shifts, the subtle misalignments of rocks, the slight tremor of the foghorn, the odd vibration in the metal, continued to coincide with his presence. By December, the pattern changed slightly. He appeared less often, but when he did, the effect was more pronounced. One night, I noticed the light rotation skipped a fraction of a second exactly when he should have appeared. Another night, a window in the lower building rattled faintly without wind. The occurrences were subtle, but I started feeling as though the lighthouse itself was aware of him. The final night I saw him was early January. The wind was calm, the fog low, and the ocean almost unnervingly still. I did my first round, climbed the catwalk, and there he was, same posture, same orientation, staring at the lighthouse. I watched from the railing, observing the faint rocking of the lighthouse glass in the lantern room. I counted 10 minutes, 15. Then he vanished. I haven't seen him since. The lighthouse operates normally. The foghorn functions without interruption. The windows stay still. And yet, when the air is calm and the ocean quiet, I still glance toward the cliff edge and the coastal forest, expecting to see him standing there. Sometimes, when I pause and listen, I think I hear the faint hum of his presence in the wind, a subtle vibration against the metal railing, or a shift in the shadow of the trees. I don't know who he was, why he appeared only on certain nights, or why the lighthouse and environment seemed to respond to him. I don't know if anyone else has ever seen him, and I've never spoken to anyone outside of work about it. All I know is that for a few weeks he existed in a precise pattern, tied to the rhythms of the lighthouse and the ocean, and I was the only one who noticed. I continue my shifts. I still log the weather, check the foghorn, climb the spiral stairs, and monitor the light. And sometimes, just sometimes, I glance toward the cliff edge or the forest line, and I feel the faint, quiet weight of someone, or something, watching, perfectly still, waiting for a calm night to appear again.